Okay, great. Let's get going. Right, I'm really delighted to be here to talk to everyone about the Environmentally Adapted Trees initiative that we have cooking out here in the heartland of the country with the Kansas Forest Service. The Environmentally Adapted Trees initiative, just in a nutshell, is an effort to help make our Great Plains community forests more resilient. Certainly better, but more resilient. And the issues out here, we have huge threats constantly with our climate, but other, threats coming and going all the time, insects and diseases, and then quite a few human-caused threats that we constantly deal with. And we got to looking around, and, even though we're in a really tough part of the world out here in the Great Plains, when the settlers arrived, they didn't find trees growing here naturally in much abundance. And yet our communities now really are forests. We have grown forests around our communities and where we live. And when we look around at these community forests, we see amazing diversity in total, collective, if you look at them. Excuse me. And if you look at our botanical gardens and arboreta, there's an amazing diversity of trees out there. And yet very few of these get used in our planted landscapes to any abundance anymore. And we're kind of simple-minded out here, and if know Tim McDonald, you realize that we don't always, think too deep. But on this kind of subject, we thought, hey, the trees are here. They're telling us these are the ones you need to be growing. Get out and use them. These are the trees that survive the western part of our region on 8 to 10 inches of moisture a year. And then out on the, the eastern part of our region, we can be quite wet at times. So the trees are out here, doing yeoman's work for our landscapes. So there's three basic things that we're really trying to get the Environmentally Adapted Trees initiative to do. First and foremost is to just highlight the trees that grow here and that we need to use more of. And then secondly, we want to look around and say, hey, here's a group of trees that just need to be brought here and trialed more. We think they're going to work here. So that's an effort we're doing. My cohort, Kendall Wires, has coordinated this effort where we now have 16 trial sites across Nebraska trialing about 24 different species that we think just need to be have a closer look in this part of the world. And then the third thing we really want to do is increase our partnerships and our collaboration with the green industry in this part of the world. It's frustrating that so many trees get planted. They basically come from big box stores, but if we can get our green industry to promote and carry these trees more, maybe we'll make a difference. So those are kind of the big things we're after here. Why are we doing this? Well, there are huge threats, and we don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about this. But out here on the plains, climate is certainly probably the biggest thing we're dealing with. It is a rough climate already, and we all hate the thought of this climate getting tougher on us. So we need to get our communities more resilient. We always stop and think about the benefits of trees. We're not going to go into that in any detail here, but just think about where we're at on the Great Plains. Can you imagine the early settlers that came out here? Many of our communities didn't have a tree around. It really was the windy, treeless plain. I don't know how they did it without going crazy, but I'm glad they did, or I wouldn't be here. And if we look at some of our communities now, this is Lincoln from the state capitol in the 1870s. It was a prairie. Look at it now. It is a community forest. We have changed this place, and our communities, even though we love our prairie environment, our communities are made much better by the trees that are around us. And we are especially important and cognizant of the need for big trees. We are losing our big trees in the established areas of our neighborhoods. Our inventories clearly reveal this, and we're not replacing those big growing trees as well as we should. Many of the threats out here are just outside of our control. There's not much we can do about a tornado or an ice storm or emerald ash borer, some of the insects and diseases, things like that. And there's really not much we can do about changing climate. It's going to get tough for us. Well, it's already tough for us. It's going to get tougher. Let's be cognizant of it, and let's say, okay, what are we going to do to adapt to this changing climate? Think about this. In 2012, in our part of the world, I live in eastern Nebraska, it did not rain from May through into September. It just did not rain. I don't remember a stretch of weather like that out here, and we are in drought country. So on the western end of our state, there were communities that recorded barely 5 inches of rain for the year, and then out here on the east, we were closer to 20 inches. And then juxtapose that with the last 2 years. In 2015, Omaha had record rainfall over 45 inches for the year. I live in Waverly, and in 2015 and 2016, I've recorded over 40 inches of rain both years. And a lot of that came in record abundance. We had some pretty incredible flooding events going on out here. We're seeing it. We're seeing the climate change, and we're also seeing apathy. So when you combine apathy with climate change, we really worry about the future of our community forests. Here's just one example. Look at this big American elm in the northeast part of Lincoln. It stood at this intersection, shading this entire intersection and this one little house for over 100 years. It survived the 1930s and Dutch elm disease, but it did not survive new owners in 2015. Why did that tree go away? Here's one other little example in the central part of Lincoln. My wife and I were looking at this house to buy. We were attracted to it by the big bur oaks that were on the south and east side of the property, planted when the house was built about 100 years ago. We didn't buy the house. The new owners did. Those great big old bur oaks went away. And we're seeing this happen by the hundreds, if not the thousands, across Lincoln every year. So, we're always playing catch-up. In some of these issues, things we can't control kind of in the natural sense, but there are a lot of things we humans do to trees that we can control. And let's get better at this first. Poor species selection, poor siting and design, poor nursery stock, bad planting, poor pruning and care. The lawn-related issues are out here for me are frustrating. Altered and compacted soil, vandalism and mistreatment. If we can make those things better, we can make our community forests better, despite what Mother Nature might throw at us. The other issue we're frustrated with is that trees are seen as a commodity, just like buying a toaster. You can go to the big box store now. This is funny to me. You can buy a bed. You can buy lumber. You can buy electrical stuff. You can buy, now you can buy food and frozen materials, and you can come out of there with a couple trees. And that just kind of surmises, what we're up against in this regard. So that leads to trees that are marketed on a national level, like autumn blaze maple and so many of the calorie pear trees that get just way overplanted across the country and including our part of the world. So here's where we're at. We say better trees begin with good species selection, broad diversity in species and age, emphasis on seed-grown trees, fewer clones, good design and siting, plant in communities and groups, high-quality nursery stock, and proper planting. So the Environmentally Adapted Trees Initiative is really focused on the idea of increasing our resiliency by increasing our genetic diversity and our species diversity. It's incredible to think about. We actually can grow over 150 distinct species or hybrids of trees out here on the treeless plains. They've proven themselves, and yet we're continuing to look for more. One thing we keep in the back of our minds all the time is that our native trees, the few native trees we have out here, the native trees really are survivors. They require genetic diversity and genetic adaptability to exist out here, and they are Hello? I had a note there. Okay, I'm going to continue to go. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here's just a couple examples of trees in our part of the world. These are bur oaks, and the one bur oak that my son is standing by there from a few years ago is nearly 500 years old. And then we have trees out in western Nebraska that are pushing 800 to 900 years old. We have long, old, living survivors in our part of the world telling us, yes, please put us to work in your communities. We're scouring the countryside. We're working with our good partners in Kansas on this effort. Tim McDonald invited us down last year. We traipsed around central and eastern Kansas. We looked at trees in arboreta like the Bartlett Arboretum at Belle Plaine, and then we also looked at trees in the native haunts, and we collected about 8 or 10 species out of there to bring back to Nebraska for trialing. We're also looking across our own state. Burr Oak Canyon exists out in the southwest part of the state. It's a disjunct stand of bur oaks that are out there on the shortgrass prairie in these ravines. Man, are they tough survivors, and we're working to get trees like that out into production. So just look around. A bur oak is telling us, hey, man, I love it out here on the plains. Plant me more in your communities, and you'll get trees that are 100 to 200 years old. Here's one example of a bur oak. There are other oak species like the Buckley oak from Texas up through Kansas or into southern Kansas, which is really looking good in the western part of our region. We could spend all day talking about oak species. We have over 40 types that will grow in eastern Nebraska, and this is maybe a dozen or 15 species that are highlighted from our region that are proven, and these oaks really are telling us that they're climate adapted if we give them half a chance. It's not just oaks. Something like a pecan tree is doing incredible work in the eastern part of our region for survivability. People complain about messy trees, but a pecan tree, unlike that walnut, the birds and the squirrels get rid of the pecans about as fast as they come on. So, and then I like what Leslie was talking about, the black cherry. You know, in a native sense, that might be moving north in terms of habitat, but in our communities, a black cherry could be used in much more abundance. And for all these darn calorie pears that everybody wants to plant, if we would just plant one black cherry, we'd really be doing ourselves a service, especially for biodiversity, for year-round interest in color, adaptability, and you know, just a better sense of who we are and where we are at on the Great Plains. And then as we look around, there are actually some planted trees here that you would think, holy cow, how do they survive out on these Great Plains environments? Something like a tulip tree in the magnolia family. It might be a weed in the southeast U.S., but it's a pretty cool tree for us in eastern Nebraska and eastern Kansas, and it looks like something we can use more of. We have quite a few old trees in our region that we can collect seeds from, produce progeny, and start planting them around, and that's kind of what we're after. If you look at this picture, the picture on the right is an old cove forest from the Smoky Mountains just outside of Gatlinburg from a few years ago. Those trees are 150 to 200 feet tall, and this picture is kind of timely because the way the Smoky Mountains have been burning as a result of the big drought they had this year. This cove forest is right at the heart of where that fire started that burned up parts of Gatlinburg, and I'm anxious to get back and see how big old tulip trees might have done in response to that fire. People always want maples in our part of the world. If you ask them for what kind of tree can we plant, they always say, yeah, bring me a maple. And that gets so frustrating for us because so many of the maples, especially the red maples, just do not do as well, and they're not as long-lived out here. It's somewhat surprising, but the better tree for us is the sugar maple. We look around our eastern Great Plains communities, and we have wonderful sugar maples that we should be keeping an eye on and reproducing and using more of. And then we look south into Oklahoma. There's the Caddo variety of sugar maple we brought up here and tested. It is amazingly drought tolerant. And then when we look west, let's look to the Rocky Mountains and like the Wasatch Range in Utah, get that big tooth sugar maple out of there and bring it to western Kansas, western Nebraska. That is a species that is proving itself somewhat adaptable out here. Other species to think about, you know, persimmon is not high on anybody's list of desired trees, but look around old farmsteads, cemeteries, community edges, you'll see persimmon trees hanging on without any care. We think about elm species that are coming back to be available on the market. There are many American elm varieties now that we can utilize again on the market. And then other elms like the rock elm on the lower left, that's a scene from Cheyenne, Wyoming, That's a poor man's pin oak. Look at that upright nature of that rock elm. That's a tree in our western region we should use a lot more of. And then on the upper right is triumph elm, just reminding us that there are many varieties of these hybrid elms available now that we can use more of. And triumph elm is definitely a tough adapted plant. We really are working hard to promote our native trees, but that doesn't mean we're going to suggest we should never use non-natives. These non-natives really do expand the palette of trees we can use. We just want to be careful about species that have potential for invasiveness. And so for me, I would really encourage people to quit planting calorie pear and amber maple. Those things are escaping and becoming pest out. We're moving away probably in the climate shift from getting to use some of our favorite evergreens, but we're keeping an eye on a few like Swiss stone pine, Meyer spruce that can probably tolerate warmer nights. Bosnian pine is going to be a good choice for the western part of our state. And then we need to think about those invasive species. Let's just quit planting calorie pear, people. That is a bad species all across this country. It needs to go away. And I'll finally wrap up here by saying we are fortunate to work with some great nursery partners, including Great Plains Nursery near Lincoln, All Our Landscape in York, and Papio Valley and Papio Valley in Omaha. These nurseries are helping us figure out how to grow these trees in root production methods that lead to much higher quality root systems, easier to use, easier to adapt, that get us away from these old standard models of root production where we end up with circled and girdling roots that really shortchange the lifespan of our urban trees. The benefits of a grow bag system: we grow better trees, that's part of it, healthier root systems ready to take off and grow. But one thing people don't realize is these grow bags trees are really just much easier to handle. You can put about 12 to 15 of these trees in the back of a pickup. You can get that many trees planted in an afternoon, and you're way further ahead than if they were all big, heavy, bald, and burlap trees. One of our nursery providers, Great Plains Nursery, has trademarked the relic oak, which comes out of that Burr Oak Canyon I mentioned. That looks to us like it has genetic hybrid diversity between Burr Oak, Post Oak, and Gamble Oak. That's going to be a really fun tree for us to try, and we think it's going to be pretty tolerant of our changing conditions. Just look at how well some of these nurseries are figuring out how to grow our great native trees. Look at what Great Plains Nursery and Heather Byers and Brian Byers are doing. Look at how those seeds have grown in just 1 year. Look at this production and the kinds of trees we're getting out of these efforts, native trees. And look what happens when you plant a 7-gallon Burr Oak in a yard. You leave it low branched. You give it a nice root zone, a good wide spread of mulch, and let it go. And in 4 years, it's becoming an amazingly little shade tree coming on quick. So thank you for your time. We are really working hard at trying to enhance the diversity, both genetic diversity and species diversity in our Great Plains communities. We're really excited to be working with our friends in Kansas on this effort, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.